Welcome, everyone, to another LinkedIn Live coming to you from Everest Group, and another one talking about impact sourcing. Super excited to be here, and even more excited about this amazing panel of experts that we have with us today. So as we get started, please go ahead and put into chat the place that you're dialing in from. We know that impact sourcing is a global phenomenon. So tell us where you're dialing in from, the companies that you represent, what you're hoping to learn from this LinkedIn Live. So my name is Rita Soni. I am Principal Analyst for Impact Sourcing and Sustainability Research at Everest Group. And one of the biggest things that I want to mention at the very start of this is that sustainability has become a really important topic for us at Everest Group. And for all of our events that are focused on sustainability, we've decided that we're going to have a tree planting competition. So for every comment, for every reaction, every like, every maybe you don't like, but I don't think we have that on LinkedIn, thankfully. Any reaction that you have, as well as comments, please just let us know what you're excited about, what you want to hear about, and where you're dialing in from, and we'll be planting a tree on your behalf. So as those comments and conversations start rolling in, I'll say I'm dialing in from beautiful Brooklyn. Well, usually beautiful Brooklyn. We are suffering a little bit right now from the horrible wildfires that are happening in Canada, and heart goes out to everyone that's suffering from this tragedy. Climate change, oh dear. We'll be talking about a different side of climate change, of sustainability. But so I'm dialing in from Brooklyn, and my colleagues here are dialing in from all different parts of the world as well. So maybe with introductions, you can tell us where you're dialing in from. Evan, do you want to get us started?
Thank you, Rita, and good day to everybody that's with us today. It's a real privilege to be here. I'm Evan Jones. I'm the Strategy Director of Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, and I'm dialing in from Johannesburg in South Africa.
Thanks, Evan. And it looks like we've got a bunch of people that are already dialing in from South Africa as well, which is amazing. Paul, do you want to give us your introduction?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Paul Steenkamp, and I'm founder of a design thinking agency called I'm Jack Frost. It's really great to be here with you, and thanks for the opportunity to share what we've been learning and to learn and connect. And I'm dialing in from Cape Town in South Africa.
Fantastic. And Marzanne, last but for sure not least.
Thank you, Rita. And hi, everyone. I'm Marzanne. I'm also with Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. I'm an executive advisor to the team, and really excited to be here today to share some of our learnings, but importantly also to learn from the audience. I'm dialing in from quite a sunny Chicago, which is quite a change and quite exciting.
That's great. That's great. Well, so the background here on why these amazing folks are with us is they have been on an interesting learning journey to understand not just what impact sourcing is, but the impact of impact sourcing, therefore our clever title today for today's event. So I think just to get us level set on what we're talking about specifically, let's go ahead and get into what is impact sourcing, just so we can get that out of the way. I think it's always a question mark that comes up in pretty much every conversation related to impact sourcing. And so if we could go ahead and get our slides going, great. So the formal definition of impact sourcing is that it is a business practice where people from marginalized communities are intentionally hired and provided with career development opportunities. And this is oftentimes meeting a bunch of different criteria or benefits within the business, CSR benefits, but even bigger, broader sustainability benefits. it's also often meeting those benefits for the businesses that are actually the clients of those companies. The fact of the matter is that marginalized, excluded communities are many, and we have some illustrative examples of target groups of people that we consider as part of the impact worker categories, if we can say that. Many are from economically disadvantaged groups, which is a lot of the reason that we saw impact sourcing beginning its journey from emerging markets and developing countries. But we also see impact sourcing as very important to socially marginalized groups, other underrepresented groups, such as veterans and people with disabilities. And then there's just other groups that keep emerging as potential groups that would be beneficial to the global services industry and are being excluded, such as refugee communities and solo parents. So with that level set, I hope we're all on the same page. And I'm seeing more and more people dialing in and telling us where they're dialing in from. We've got India represented. We've got the UK represented. So please go ahead and keep sharing with us where it is that you're dialing in from. Quick reminder, we're planting a tree for every single one of those comments. But also, more importantly, tell us what you're curious about learning in this, as well as contribute in terms of what's the impact of impact. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide and really get into the meat of the discussion. So I think, Evan, you're going to get us started on talking about the 6 themes that emerged in your listening and learning journey.
Sure, Rita. I'll kick us off with a little bit of context, and then Paul will take us through some of the process as well. But it's just wonderful that this industry that we all work in is really embracing the topic of impact sourcing, and not just at a topic level. I mean, what we're seeing is real demonstration effect across many operators and clients, and really starting to deliver on impact sourcing. And what's fantastic is there's a real will and a strategic will to do more. And so the question of measurement has come up, and it's a very topical point across many organizations. And as a Harambee, we've been operating for 12 years now and working with youth unemployment, and measurement is at the core of what Harambee does. So the opportunity to engage with the GBS sector, specifically given its maturity curve on impact sourcing, has just been wonderful. And we've certainly learned a great deal from the various organizations that we've spoken to. But I'll talk more about specific themes, and I'll hand over to Paul to talk you through some more of the process that we went through.
Thanks, Evan and Rita. Yeah, so I'm also very grateful that we got the opportunity to walk this learning journey with Harambee. And basically, we're asked to help facilitate a design thinking inspired process that began with connecting with the humans who are in this space and tasked with doing this measurement work, and recognizing that because it's quite a pioneering field, there are a lot of pains associated with it. And we really wanted to fall back in love with the problems that they're experiencing. We know that from an ESG reporting perspective, there are some struggles associated with defining and measuring the S part of ESG in a transparent and authentic way. And our intention really was to fall in love with the problems that people tasked with doing that kind of definition and reporting were experiencing out in the field. So we went on a journey to listen and learn and hopefully be part of igniting the right level of conversation around this challenge. We spent about 6 months in this early phase of discovery. And we interviewed multiple organizations spanning buyers and suppliers and impact organizations, NGOs and philanthropic organizations as well. We spoke to lots of different kinds of people, ESG leads, executives, people in human capital roles, key industry stakeholders such as the Everest Group and the Global Impact Sourcing Coalition. And we also tackled a bunch of desktop research. And 6 key themes emerged. And I think it's worth noting that at this stage of the journey, we recognize that we welcome any questions that might emerge around these themes, because we recognize they're probably still good questions, and we're not nearly in a position to give excellent answers to everything that needs to be discussed. So this is just a distillation of the 6 key themes that emerged. There may be others, but I'm going to introduce the first 2, and then I'm going to hand over to Evan and Marzan to tackle the last 4. We're not presenting them in any order of priority or importance. They're all equally important in our view. So the first is that the ecosystem is quite a contested place when it comes to frameworks. There are a lot of regional nuances that need to be taken into account from a definitions perspective. And generally, we heard a call for simplicity and guidance. And that really stems from the fact that there appears to be a lack of standardized definitions and metrics for impact sourcing. Secondly, ownership for the measurement of impact sourcing and the S in the ESG within complex organizations, many operating multinationally, often lands up falling on the desk of human capital professionals. But we learned that there are multiple stakeholders within these large complex organizations who care deeply about ESG. And come from other parts of the business, including these firms, including procurement and finance and operations, and the C-suite. So in addition to the HROs, many of them are feeling pressure from buyers and clients and investors to report on the ROI and impact of this work. And many of them share the objective of wanting to do so in a way that attracts extra energy and attention into this topic and helps scale investment and impact associated with it.
Thank you, Paul. I think to build then off of what Paul said is what we've also learned in speaking to many stakeholders is that there are many tracking inefficiencies and inconsistencies. I think it may resonate with those on the call that tracking impact is hard. It's challenging. Data in disparate formats, data from different sources, and then doing that against a standardized framework, but also being very appreciative of the regional nuances. It's tricky. And so we're learning that tracking can be quite manual. It can be very labor intensive. And certainly what we've also learned is there's a lot being done in this space to learn and iterate and improve. Some organizations are more mature, others are on the starting point of their journey, but certainly there is this theme around wanting to be more efficient and effective in tracking data. I think to build then off of that is once you have this data, you can tell the story in terms of the impact, but really what matters are the humans' stories. And so it's as much sharing your data and the measurement as telling the story of that young woman who is now earning a salary for the first time, one of the first in her family to earn a salary and support her parents and support her siblings. It's those stories that are so important. And there are many of those stories. And so really the data is about telling those stories. But importantly, not losing sight also of the business case and the business benefit. We are still commercial organizations who need to show that we are delivering quality services and high-performing services. And so really it's about how are we tracking data more efficiently and effectively to tell the human stories, but also to share the business benefits and ROI. And that's really been a big theme that we've uncovered.
Excellent. Thanks, Marzan. Before I pick up on theme 5 and 6, I just want to say it's wonderful to see so many industry friends chatting. John, I see Luvendra, Shami, Shona. It's just wonderful. Diane Mayers from the UK. It's wonderful. And I actually with your permission, Rita, I think we should set a target for those trees, which is, I think, 50 comments, 50 trees. I think that would be a wonderful outcome. But just to pick up where Marzan had left off, another key theme that we've picked up is gathering data whilst adhering to privacy laws. And privacy laws are very nuanced in different countries. And naturally, if we're trying to measure what sort of impact, which sort of impact worker we've brought into our organizations, how could we categorize them? This is naturally very sensitive information as a general rule of thumb, and then we've got different data privacy laws to adhere to in different countries. That being said, we've had some wonderful roundtables with Everest, and there's some incredible solutions around this that organizations are actually deploying. So I think just applying one's mind, particularly around metrics and process, there certainly are green shoots of solutions around how to deal with this. The sixth, which is a topic that's very close to my heart, I think about it often, is the topic of funding. So when I'd kicked off, I'd said there's a real strategic will, and we're seeing operators and end buyers really wanting to engage in the topic of impact sourcing, a real strategic will to do more. But of course, the question of how does this get funded, because the cost of impact sourcing is a very real cost for organizations to consider. And in a commercial world, how can this be done? But we operate in an ecosystem of philanthropies that have willing and interest in this space, an ecosystem of governments in their respective countries that have a strategic will to want to do more. We are also seeing buyers that want to actually invest in impact sourcing, as do operators. So there is the possibility of reimagining more strategically how funding and financing can flow into the sector and flow into impact sourcing solutions. Thanks, Rita. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Evan. And of course, I love setting goals. I'm going to have a goal a little more than 50, at least in the back of my head, but you made that public, so we'll go with that one. On the note of differences, I really want to highlight one comment that's come in from John. Thank you so much, John, for being here and for being such an advocate for impact sourcing. But the terminology is probably beside the point, right? There's a lot of impact sourcing happening, but going by so many different names. There's a bunch of different inclusive hiring practices that are within the spirit of doing impact sourcing. Because in our world, it's really about being intentional and about having an impact on real people's lives. So please keep the comments and the questions coming in, as well as reactions. So I think, there's 6 themes that the team has come up with, and many of them, at least for me, resonated in different ways. I think I really reacted to what Paul mentioned as sustainability and impact sourcing specifically being something that's across the organization. We know that from everything that we're trying to do from a net zero perspective. So of course, that's also got to be the same case for the people side of the business, which is the core of global services. I also liked Marzan reminding us that we have human stories here. This is people that we're talking about, individuals, and oftentimes their entire families that are affected by these job opportunities and these career opportunities. So, putting them front and center in this is really critical in this conversation. And, Evan, I doubted your comment on funding. I was like, wait, we're talking about the do-good side of things. But no, it's so true that there is this ecosystem that has a strategic role to play in furthering impact sourcing as a model, as a practice. And so I think, recognizing that every stakeholder has a role to play, or has a potential role to play in furthering it and scaling the impact, that's what matters. So I think these were all really great comments. And I'd love to hear from our audience about what they think are some of their major challenges or their thoughts about these 6 themes. Do one or two emerge for you as more important than the others, or more difficult than the others? We've had a bunch of different conversations around this. Evan, Paul, and Marzan also were part of internal discussions that we've had with our ecosystem of impact sourcing. And so would love to get more comments. And I think one of the more interesting things about who we see on this call is that we see both people that are dialing in from emerging markets as well as more established markets. Peter is dialed in from Canada. That's exciting. I hope you're doing okay as well. We in Brooklyn are feeling a lot of sympathy over here for you. So yeah, Evan, Paul, Marzan, please jump in on some of the things that we learned besides the commentary that you've already given on those themes.
Sure. Perhaps Rita, I'll jump in. And just to say, we've had the wonderful privilege, and thanks to Everest for presenting these themes in different roundtable scenarios. And in fact, in the latest roundtable scenario, we had asked the closed audience to rank them. And what was fascinating about that conversation is pretty much everyone ranked one of the 6 as first. And so for us, that was very telling in that the themes really were resonating. And so the idea of telling stories really resonated as a priority. The idea of data privacy really resonated for some. The idea of the ownership of impact sourcing. And of course, what came up very topically is, to Paul's point and John's comment, which is impact sourcing frameworks and the call for simplicity. So it is our hope that these themes start to shape a dialogue amongst industry to really help us advance more than we already are. So yeah, I'll pause there. Perhaps my colleagues want to say a word or two.
Sure, I don't mind taking the baton, and maybe just to dive a little bit deeper into the different agendas that we uncovered for different types of people that we spoke to. And from an ESG lead perspective, and we're generalizing a bit here for the sake of brevity, but it was really about wanting to show the use and success of impact sourcing in their ESG reports, by and large. But for people working in the human capital space, especially execs in that space, they were wanting to measure and report on impact worker performance. Other execs around the C-suite table wanting to prove the return on investment for implementing impact sourcing as part of their organization's impact strategy. So very much complementary agendas, but slightly nuanced in terms of our findings.
Great. So we've got a great comment here from Neil. Trade, not aid. Impact sourcing has too much of a charity perception, which we need to change the narrative around. That is my view. Of course, we can build commercial impact sourcing efforts that also solve business needs. Completely, everyone on the LinkedIn Live is nodding their heads. Neil, we completely agree with you. I think terminologies aside, I think I've been fighting for this concept of it not being charity from day one, because it's not. There's a business benefit to doing impact sourcing. And in fact, I would say we started this conversation without even really reiterating what the business benefit is of impact sourcing, because we've sort of taken that as a given, which was maybe my mistake. So, Marzan, do you want to comment on that and reiterate the business benefits of impact sourcing?
Mm-hmm. Neil, I think it's a great point, and certainly what we have found, having done some case studies, is that, and this is part of the measurement, is really understanding that those people who are beneficiaries of inclusive hiring, impact sourcing, we often see that they perform, if not the same, actually better than other workers. And I think there's an element of just diligence, resilience, commitment, passion in what they're doing. And so I think when we talk about telling the stories of those who are in these opportunities, it's also telling the ROI for a business to have these people in these opportunities and doing this work. Organizations who are looking at impact sourcing need to answer the question on, am I doing good, but am I also doing good for my business? And I think that's important, right? And so that's what we need to focus on. So I agree with you. It's not about the charity perception. It's actually about doing good for your business as well, quality services to your customers. And we've certainly learned that impact sourcing beneficiaries are actually those who can deliver quality services.
Absolutely agree. Evan, I think you've had some interesting experiences on this topic as well.
I think Niels raised such a wonderful comment, and I couldn't agree more. And in some of the more kind of mature, sophisticated organizations that we've engaged with that have been thinking about impact measurement for a long time, they're starting to actually compare their impact workers in terms of attrition, absenteeism, and those sorts of productivity metrics. And in one case, they're seeing 140% commercial return on investment compared to normal intakes because of the improvements in some of those metrics. We've also seen some organizations comparing typical performance metrics like Net Promoter Score and starting to see on par, if not better. And in fact, in the very same case, it's that organization that has started to calculate the commercial benefit and actually reinvest as an organization independent of any funders or government, which has been their solve for how to scale impact sourcing. So there is certainly a commercial case and one should make it.
Yeah, if I may add just very quickly, Rita, one of the themes to emerge around this topic was a desire to start measuring the extent to which organizations were able to attract new customers by being on this kind of journey, and also de-risk their business as well, just given how interconnected, especially the multinational organizations are into global events, and being able to spread risk from an always-on operational perspective. So yeah, just another couple of angles on the commercial pragmatism around the topic.
I think that's a great point to add. Thank you, Paul, that you're actually accessing a new market by integrating impact sourcing into your business. And just, to bring the conversation back to the broader sustainability question, we know that businesses are looking at their scope 3 emissions and their vendors to figure out what they're doing as far as their carbon footprint. But we also know that regulation is very quickly going to come into the area of social. And guess what? These exact models are going to be the beneficial parts of your scope 2 and 3 from a social perspective. So I think that's a great point. And Evan, I think your colleague, Evan and Marzan's colleague, Sharmi, has nodded in the same direction as far as what the business case is and calling for more of these metrics. And I don't think it's very complex at this point. The complexity is how to do the measuring, how to actually get to those indicators of what is it that's demonstrating of impact. So Sharmi, thank you so much for being here. Impact is there in your title. So I feel good that we're sort of on the right path for talking about this. But I think we can also start talking a little bit about what some of those solutions are to solving these challenges. It's not just a bunch of difficulties that we have. I think we've also seen and heard about some solutions, right?
Yeah, Rita, just one final comment just on on Niels' point. I had an interaction with a global CFO of one of the larger BPOs globally with over 100,000 people. And when I engaged with the global CFO, he made some very interesting comments. The one was they have tangible ways in which to measure the E and the G, and they have evidence and documentation. And if they could solve for tangible evidence and documentation for measurement of the S, it would actually increase the valuation of their business as a whole. And so just to pick up on Neil's point about there's a commercial case, I think there's a commercial case from a few angles actually that are worth considering strategically. Definitely.
Yeah, I agree. So would any of you would like to comment on some of the interesting solutions that we've seen to demonstrating that ROI in the business case?
Sure. I mean, I'm very happy to start, and I think just picking up off the example I used earlier with one global operator. I mean, that measuring impact sourcing is very much at the core of their operations. I mean, so it really starts from the onboarding and all the way through with integrated systems. But importantly, the business intelligence and data teams are very much tracking these impact workers at a performance level against some of the metrics I had mentioned earlier. But then important to theme 6, it's not just about the data, it's also about the stories. And so tracking the stories of those individuals as they progress through the organization, telling those stories and bringing those stories to life. And also beyond the organization, they're seeing what happens if they progress into other industries or different jobs. And when that data and when those stories are illuminated, what we've seen in those cases is it attracts more investment from the business, more support from philanthropies, more growth, more scaling. And in that particular example, the organization has now set a goal and a target for 50% of all its intakes to be impact workers because of that. So that's just some of the art of the possible. So that would be one solution that we've seen.
I love that. Paul, could you talk a little bit about, I think we've also heard about surveys and ways that can be a good way of gathering data to actually make a demonstration.
Yeah, certainly, I think what we're learning is that there's a lot of room to still solution in the space. And from a knowledge gathering perspective, I think surveys are a tool that are actively being used. But there are challenges around from a data protection perspective. How do you encourage and or get permission for people to participate in things like that and do so over, longitudinally, so that you can build case study and story over time in a way that's verifiable and, so certainly a tool that is in use, but has some challenges. And what we did notice was that, as we've mentioned, there were measurement frameworks in place and certainly definitions that are available for people to reference. There are also things like case studies that are used to, as we've spoken about, from a storytelling perspective. And we're starting to see some green shoots around things like implementation guides, because as we've been discussing, especially in complex organizations, turning the flywheel and infusing this kind of work into the operations of a business is a long journey, it seems, and complex work. And so we're starting to see some early sort of implementation guides emerge, and or toolkits that people inside organizations can access for learning about the topic and trying to integrate it into their business units. Yeah, I think that's maybe what I'd like to add at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's very much in line with this LinkedIn user that commented about the true nature of impact taking time to manifest itself. And so we do need to rely on some of the case studies and the more specific individual attributes. But I also think, Paul and team, correct me if I'm wrong, I think one of the things within surveys that seemed interesting to me is that they can also be done in an anonymous manner, as well as in a manner that's it's totally optional for one to respond to that survey. And I think one of the benefits of that tool, and obviously it's going to be a periodic tool, is that suppose you're asking questions about, say, a disability status, and suddenly you're finding out that this person may do better at their job if there's some kind of an accessibility tool that would help them be better at it. So surveys seem like, oh, that's such a basic, but in the end, it can be actually very, very powerful.
Yeah, Rita, I'd like to echo that. I mean, one of the inspiring conversations I remember was an organization who mentioned that for people who were coming in as into these kind of roles, they were asked up front, how would you like to help sort of pay it forward or contribute as part of your journey? And well, first of all, they were asked, would you like to pay it forward and contribute as part of your journey? And if they said yes, they were asked, how would you like to contribute? And if they weren't sure, then they were given some options to consider. And participation in things like surveys over time was one of those options. So, yeah, thanks for pushing me on that one. It was a good one to throw into the mix.
Thanks.
I mean, also, if I may speak on your behalf, Paul, I mean, what we're also seeing, and what certainly Paul is advocating in this space, is prototyping solutions and testing things in rapid experimental ways to see what we get. So in the case of tracking impact workers post being employed, I know Paul, for example, is prototyping with an organization to test different channels, even social media channels, WhatsApp channels. Prototyping really to test different aspects of impact measurement and tracking, I think, is also something we're seeing a lot of.
That's really interesting, and I can't wait to see what the results of that prototyping are. So, I think it's applying what we know from being tech providers and tech enablers to this social space. It just seems like using that same knowledge. There's still a lot of people that are on our LinkedIn Live that have so much knowledge, and it would be great if you could start sharing with us what you're doing to measure the impact of impact, and what's worked, and even sharing things that haven't worked. The whole point of these exercises is that we can learn from each other. And before we move on to Marzanne talking about more solutions, I just want to give a quick shout out to my friend Tracy. I couldn't actually agree with you more on this entire space getting into the broader sense of ESG, and I love the way that you put that. And I think South Africa in the house with that representation. Yes, 5 and 10x impact is something that is being seen in South Africa, and with that much more potential to go, both in South Africa and across the world, as we look at marginalized communities sort of standing up and saying we want to be recognized and given opportunities. This is a way to do it. So I just had to call out our friend Tracy on that comment, which I really do love. So Marzanne, can I bring it back to you and get you to comment on more solutions or ways that we can address these challenges of actually getting into real, believable impact metrics?
I think the one thing about real impacts is there's two ways to think about it. The one is what we're hearing from the impact workers and using surveying as a tool, and Paul and Ev spoke about that. One thing I do want to add about surveying is, and we've seen many of the organizations that we're talking to trial it, test it, try it at scale, which is what we need. The one thing that we have to solve for, and keen to hear if anyone has experience in this, is what is the motivation or the incentive for the impact worker to actually give that feedback? And we've seen this in spaces where we really need the data to tell our story and to package it and to create that ROI. But what is the incentive and what is the motivation for the impact worker to provide us with that data? And so that is something that we continuously grappling with and continuously trying to understand. And it's a very interesting topic because that's around the human behavior to give us the information. It's the age-old what's in it for them. We know what's in it for us, but what's in it for them, and solving for that is really important. I think the other thing is also considering whether there are some macroeconomic indicators. So certainly what we sometimes look at it at a community level, can we see changes in trends in a community? And that's maybe more difficult to attribute. So the question of attribution becomes more tricky, but those are definitely things that we think about and grapple with. They're a little bit more sticky and complex. But really, if you want to tell the story, you need to solve for the information from the beneficiary, but also if there are macro indicators from a community that you are working in to see if you can actually get data to tell your story.
Yeah, and taking it sort of your second point first, I know from my own experience of working directly with impact sourcing specialists, particularly, I think it's often easier to see the impact when there's a focus on impact sourcing. But there's a rural BPO that has been able to measure in the communities where they work that the age of marriage has gone up in that community, and even so. And then the follow through is the age of having children or not even leaving work after having children. So actually seeing that community impact is huge. And of course, attributing the where did that result come from? That's a complex story, but at least being able to show that there's change that's happening, I think is really exciting. And I think your first point about incentives on why should an impact worker really talk about how this job is changing their lives or what's in it for them. And I wonder if there are instances that you've seen around, just the fact that a business changes from that input as kind of the incentive. So then the flywheel effect takes place. I gave the example earlier of if you're someone with a physical disability and that there's assistive devices that might help you do your job better. But there's examples across the board of other things that we've seen with impact sourcing. For instance, there's a company that has seen their focus marginalized group are solo parents. And they decided that, you know what? For solo parents, one thing that would be really helpful from a policy perspective is to double the number of sick days for those solo parents, so that there's better backup, there's better ways to manage their workloads. Now, that could be seen as, we're being heard. Surveys are being taken, and then we're being heard, and then there's a change. So I sort of throw that out to the group as some, positive examples and other things that would be great to hear from.
Rita, you've just reminded me of, and I know Paul, I think, wants to talk to an innovative blockchain solution that I know philanthropy is exploring. But you remind me of a solution that I saw that was premised on a pay-it-forward model. So the idea of impact and scaling impact was made very clear to new people joining the organization. And really, they were encouraged to pay it forward by sharing information so that the organization could do more and reinvest more. And that drove a real positive behavior within that particular operation that we spoke to. So I think being very transparent and clear and making it clear that paying it forward and doing more is the intention of why the information is important as well.
Yeah. And I think we've gotten a lot of head nods via comments in our LinkedIn Live as well. Anuj Goyal has also commented that the monitoring and measurement and the frequency of how we're doing that monitoring and measurement is what's required. And we totally agree with that. On the note of taking things forward, I think I'd like to take a pause right now as we're getting into the second half of our LinkedIn Live and say one way that we at Everest Group are getting a chance to pay it forward is through a really exciting initiative by the Clinton Foundation. So, ta-da, on behalf of this industry, the Everest Group in September of 2022 made a pledge at the Clinton Global Initiative to grow impact sourcing from its current size of about 350,000 impact workers worldwide to over 500,000. And we'd like to do that we pledged to do that by 2026. I'm pretty sure that most of you that are on the call know that we can do it a lot sooner and a lot larger. But that aside, a bunch of companies, as you can see, and I'm sorry for the sort of eye chartness. Actually, I think all of our slides have been a little bit of an eye chart. But we're just really excited that all of these companies have agreed to be part of this pledge and are actively participating in this. I think some of you are on the call today as well. I think I saw somebody from Daisy Crew and a few others. Sorry, another opportunity to plant some trees. Some shout outs for the companies that you represent. Please do remind me of who you are. So if you are interested in joining this pledge, and growing the work that you're doing with impact sourcing, in addition to just talking about just being part of this and a public proclamation that you're doing this, this is going to help with, as we collect the information, collect data, we talk about success stories, we talk about the growth of the industry, and bring it to a broader platform. I think what's also very exciting about this is the Clinton Global Initiative itself takes place during the UN General Assembly week. So it's an important week when there's a lot of heads of state that are in town, as well as heads of businesses. The heads of state, I think it would be great for them to hear about ways to incentivize this kind of inclusive employment. And some countries are already doing it, some in the form of mandates, some in the form of incentives. So it's a really great opportunity to be part of this movement. So again, I think on the chat, you should see a section where you can click on a link to show that you're going to be part of this impact sourcing movement and help grow the workforce to 500,000. So coming back to our conversation, Evan, Paul, Marzan, are there other things that you feel like you've learned or seen as demonstrated that can be useful in this impact journey? I think we saw some really interesting conversations around industry associations or industry bodies, even like Everest Group. But are there thoughts around that you want to share with the audience?
Sure, Rita. Maybe just to take half a step back to the discussion we were having around how to incentivize people to participate in the tracking and measuring journeys. We had a great conversation with UNICEF, who have launched a platform by youth for youth here in Africa called YOMA, YOMA. And they've also followed an ethical and human-centered design process in designing and building and scaling that platform. And what we learned from them, and it resonated very strongly based on our lived experiences, that in many communities, throughout the continent, there is an irrepressible entrepreneurial spirit, including amongst the youth. And given that the platform was designed for youth and by youth, there was a strong view expressed by youth that they wanted to reserve the right to commercialize their personal data. They really saw it as an asset, and so not I'm not speaking generally, but there were strong voices amongst the youth saying, we would like to share our data and be, as part of a commercial transaction, as long as we get to control, which parts of the data that we share. So that was an interesting revelation as well, and I think something worth considering, particularly given that many of these types of people and their communities would benefit from extra income, as long as it is done ethically and on their terms.
Interesting example. I'll definitely have to look up the Yoma platform and understand more about what UNICEF is doing. I hope they've been able to see some of the interesting work that we've been doing with youth in Africa more generally. I think speaking of industry associations or industry bodies, I'm going to call out Tracy again, and I love her comment. It feels like almost a summary of what we've been talking about as well. So, Tracy, thank you for this comment, and I'm just going to read it out. The biggest takeouts we saw with previous studies engaging individuals who've been recruited and employed via an impact sourcing model is that their confidence is increased. This has had phenomenal and positive knock-on effects in their personal lives, allowing them to set boundaries for themselves, taking chances on themselves where they would never have, generally becoming a more imbalanced, productive member of society, which is positive for all. And I think, I kind of get goosebumps reading a statement like that, because the four of us have been extremely fortunate in really seeing impact sourcing in action. And I think if there's anyone on the call who hasn't actually seen this in action, for sure reach out. Businesses across the globe, you saw the slew of logos earlier, but across the globe are doing this, and in doing this in a variety of ways to, in the end, ensure that their business is successful as much as the individual is successful. And whether their model is to be an on-ramp into the global services industry, get this person, skilled up and then enter into a larger role, or skilled up and go into other industries. The fact is that this space is about getting inclusion in the broader economic prosperity that is happening across the globe, and making sure that no one is left behind on that journey.
Rita, if I may, I think the role of organized business structures, industry associations, the role Everest is playing, John, and the Impact Sourcing Alliance, these are really critical forums for our industry to engage in. And I think these organized structures have an important role to shape the dialogue. And I believe, and I don't think the 6 themes are exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination. There's probably lots more to unearth and uncover. But certainly, I think a structured dialogue around some of these things, I think, will go a long way for all of us. The topic of frameworks, the topic of privacy, the topic of data gathering, and I think there's so much to learn from one another against these topics as well, so that we can all advance.
And Rita, one last thing around just the role that we can play in this, and exactly as Ev said, there are many more themes, but one of the big things I actually care about deeply is how we absorb impact workers into the organization, and the support we provide them when we induct them and onboard them. And we've certainly learned that we as leaders, operational leaders, need to understand our role in setting those impact workers up for success. And so that's probably also one of the big things we as leaders need to keep in mind. It's all about measuring and ROI and telling stories, but also setting those impact workers up for success, and what we need to do that.
I love that. And I think, and Sushmita, I think, also loves your commentary on the macroeconomic indicators of measurement as well. I think this has been a really great conversation as we get close to top of the hour. One last engagement I'd like for the audience is we have at Everest Group we've decided that sustainability is a very important topic, and we're going to focus on it as a research agenda to in the back of my background saying for confident decision making. Specifically in the area of impact sourcing, we are focused on a bunch of different things. And again, another eye chart. You can find access to our research agenda, both what's been published as well as what's coming up. If you're a member, that's part of your membership. But we also want your ideas on what all we should be covering as far as impact sourcing. As you possibly can see, if you have really great eyesight here, we're doing things like creating a playbook for impact sourcing, both how service providers create an impact sourcing program within their existing talent models, as well as for the buyers of these services, how it is that they can be asking for impact sourcing. How do you stand up an impact sourcing program in your procurement circles, for example? We'll also be doing another revise of the state of the market. We've got to come up with a number for the Clinton Foundation, but also with a new renewed focus on traditional large providers. I would say our last year's state of the market was really focused on kind of the experts, the specialists in impact sourcing. So we will be looking at that. But if there's some other ideas of things we could be covering, for instance, we know that there's going to be a really huge effect of regenerative AI, particularly on this work segment. Some of the things that impact workers are doing right now will disappear, depending on how quickly that technology is able to advance. So please share ideas on the chat, help us plant more trees, on what more we should be covering. And I think earlier Tracy said something that I think has been on my mind for years in this space of, well, how long is an impact worker really an impact worker? When do they move into being a traditional worker? And I think that's important in this kind of a conversation when we're talking about metrics, because in the end, we want to work ourselves out of a job and have this inclusive method of employment as just a standard operating procedure, and inclusion becomes a self-fulfilling wheel because of the successes that you have with that inclusion. So I think if we could get some more ideas on what more we should be addressing as an organization, that would be great. I'm actually, Evan, Paul, Marzan, I have not asked you, do you see other topics that we should be covering as far as impact sourcing?
I think each of the themes is a topic in of themselves, Rita. And maybe just to throw the gauntlet out there, maybe to Everest, I don't know, maybe to John at Impact Sourcing Alliance. I think it would be wonderful to bring this community together in person on this topic to really, really grapple and get into some of the detail of what these themes mean. I would certainly welcome that sort of opportunity.
Great. Any last thoughts, Paul, Marzan?
Maybe just from my side, I think a potential golden thread that runs through all of these topics is the need to strike a balance between the universal nature of this topic and the uniqueness of context in all these different regions and countries, and even within countries, especially the big ones. I think that's quite a fascinating, juicy design challenge.
Nothing more to add, Rita. Just a huge thank you to everyone and for the contributions to allow us to learn and share some of our learnings.
Well, I think the journey continues, Marzan, on that point. There's still a lot to learn and a lot to do. battling inequity is a full-time job. Thank you so much to all of you for being our expert panelists and everyone that joined the live session of this conversation. The great thing about the LinkedIn Live, the great thing about impact sourcing also, but the great thing about LinkedIn Live is the recording will be available right after we log off. So if you missed anything or you came in late and wanted to catch what all those comments were about, or even if you want to add more thumbs up and claps, we welcome that. With all of your participation and your interest, we'll be able to plant a bunch of trees and hopefully grow impact sourcing from its current levels to the potential that exists. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.